Good afternoon, everyone. This is a public workshop for San Diego APCD. We're going to get started in just a few minutes after we have a few more people jump online. So just hang with us and then we'll go ahead and get started in a minute or two. Thank you. Okay, looks like the registrations and the room invites have slowed down here. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with our workshop today. So I would like to welcome everyone to and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today, as I just mentioned, we're going to be going over proposed amendments to existing Rule 69.3.1, which is our stationary gas turbine engine rule. And then also as well as amendments to existing Rule 69.4.1, which is our stationary reciprocating internal combustion engine rule. First, we'll do some quick introductions from district staff on the line today, and then we'll get into the bulk of our presentation. And we'll have ample time, we think, to get into questions and feedback that you may have. My name is Dick Cormier. I'm the Rule Development Supervisor here at the district. Presenting with me today will be Associate Engineers Randy Constellation and Miriam Sanchez. We also have Administrative Analyst Janet McHugh, who is supporting us behind the scenes today, logistics-wise. We also have a couple of other APCD staff on the line from different divisions who can help out in answering questions if there are any. We're here today so you can learn a bit more about proposed rule amendments, but we mainly want to hear from you. If you'd like to submit comments after today's presentation, we'll be accepting comments after this workshop until Friday, November 7th. Please note that today we're going to be recording this workshop, and we do hope to post the recording to the district's YouTube page by the end of this week. Also, the presentation that you'll be hearing today is already up on the district's Rule Development Workshop webpage. And we'll go ahead and drop a link to that PDF to that presentation, so you have that in a few minutes here. So with that was just some quick logistics before we get going. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand the reins over to Miriam Sanchez first. Miriam?
Yes. Thank you, Nick. So good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start this presentation with some background to explain why we're here today. We'll go over how federal clean air standards apply to the district and explain why we're proposing these amendments to these rules. We'll also briefly talk about startup, shutdown, and malfunction events, and also review reasonably available control technology or RACT requirements. Next, we'll go over the proposed amendments to Rule 69.3.1 for turbine engines, and also the proposed amendments to Rule 69.4.1, which applies to internal combustion engines. We'll then discuss the potential impacts of these proposed rules amendments, and then we'll outline the next steps after today's workshops, which includes public input deadlines. And finally, we'll open up the floor for any questions and feedback you may have at the end of the presentations. Next slide, please. So, the district's main goal, as you may already know, is to protect the public health and keep our air clean in our county. Right now, rules 69.3, 69.3.1, and 69.4.1, they already set limits for NOx and carbon monoxide from turbine engines and internal combustion engines. However, under the Clean Air Act, emissions from these engines must be controlled at all times, even when engines are starting up, shutting down, or having a malfunction. As a result, EPA removed previous exemptions during these times and now require emission limits to apply continuously. Emission standards in Rule 69.3.1 and 69.4.1 currently do not apply to startup and shutdown periods or include alternative emission limitations during these periods. So EPA cannot approve these existing rules. Next slide, please. So what are these events or periods that we're talking about? It's pretty straightforward. Startup, shutdown, and malfunction events, they occur when a stationary turbine or an internal combustion engine begins operation, ceases operation, or if a malfunction occurs. The rule amendments we are proposing today, they are following the EPA's 2015 startup shutdown and malfunction policy guidelines, which are consistent with the Clean Air Act requirements that emission limitations must be applied continuously. These proposed amendments that we're talking about today, they are including existing time-limited requirements and specific technology or work practices requirements to control these emissions during these periods. Next slide, please. Proposed amendments are also being driven to fulfill federal reasonably available control technology or REC requirements associated with federal ozone standards. In December 2020, the district submitted a REC demonstration to the EPA through CARB in compliance with the Clean Air Act. But despite having the plan for 4 years, EPA never took action upon it when it became subject to litigation, which then became subject to litigation, which forced them to act upon it by October 2024 via consent decree. Because of a lack of adequate guidance from EPA on what actions might need to be taken to address outstanding concerns, and inadequate time needed to address those concerns through specific district rules, APCD was forced to withdraw the 2020 REC demonstration from further consideration. An APC letter documenting some of these concerns can be found at the QR code on the screen. As a result, EPA then issued a finding of failure to submit notice in December 2024 due to the missing REC document. This finding started an offset sanction clock for the region, meaning the district must act, and EPA needs to affirm the submittal of a revised REC demonstration and a complete SIP submittal no later than July 13, 2026, so we can avoid regional sanctions. As a result, APCD is planning to propose the amendments to Rules 69.3.1 and 69.4.1, as well as the updated REC document to a board this upcoming spring. Next slide, please. We'll first go over the proposed amendments to Rule 69.3.1, excuse me, which applies to stationary gas turbines. The main and most important provision to this rule is the relocation of existing exemptions in subsections B3 and D4 to now new subsections D3 and D4, which apply to startup and shutdown periods. We have also added new subsections D5 and D6 under standards to specify how turbines can minimize their emissions during startup and shutdown periods, so we can meet EPA's policy guidelines. We have also slightly revised subsection C15, which defines period of operation at low load, to simply specify startup and shutdown and fuel change in operation periods. Lastly, we have added to subsection E4 to the monitoring and record-keeping requirements, just to be consistent with the new subsections and standards. Next slide, please. Here you can see the existing exemptions in subsection B3 and B4 on page 1 and 2 of the workshop rule draft, that they are crossed out and they got moved to the standards section as now subsections D3 and D4, as you can see on page 7. These requirements have not changed from the existing rule, with the exception of one last sentence in B3I, which has been completely removed from the rule. Next slide, please. Here you can see the new subsections that we have added in standards, D5 and D6, that can be found on page 7 and 8 of the workshop rule draft. The new subsection D5 was added to specify how turbines can minimize their emissions during these times. And also new subsection D6 has also been added just to be consistent with EPA's guidelines. Next slide, please. Here you can simply see that we just removed the word unit and replaced it with combined cycle turbines in subsection D2 to clarify that those emission limits only apply to combined cycle turbines. And this is just simply to clear up, just for clarity purposes. It doesn't have to do with the shutdown and startup events requirements. On page 6, you'll see that in subsection D2, we have added new language to simply clarify that an extended startup must meet the characteristics and parameters described in its definition, which did not change. Next slide, please. Here you can see that a minor revision was made to the definition of period of operation at low load, which is in subsection C15 on page 4, to basically just specify the type of operation, period, or event, rather than just referencing other subsections within the rule. Finally, you'll see that we have added language to subsection E4 in the monitoring and record keeping requirements to simply be consistent with new subsection D5. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of the amendments that we're proposing today, and which applies to the stationary gas turbines engine. And you can see the sections that we have amended, which is just B, C, D, and E. And I'll now turn it over to Randy so he can go over the amendments for Rule 69.4.1. Randy?
Thank you, Miriam. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of the proposed amendments to Rule 69.4.1, stationary reciprocating internal combustion engines. Requirements during commissioning periods in subsection B2 have been reformatted. The SSM related exemptions in section B for non-emergency engines have been moved to new section D3 standards. New subsections D4 and D5 have been added for consistency with the EPA's SSM policy guidelines, which include some best management practices. The frequency of annual maintenance requirements has been revised from once each calendar year to 1 year plus 30 days from the previous maintenance event. This change is consistent with similar requirements in NESHAP 4Z for stationary reciprocating internal combustion engines. Finally, a minor revision has been made to subsection G5 to reference the SSM requirements in subsection D3. We'll go over these changes in more detail in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. Here are the proposed amendments to subsection B2, the commissioning period requirements, which can be found on page 2 of the workshop rule draft. These requirements have not changed from the existing rule. They have only been reformatted due to the relocation of the SSM requirements for non-emergency engines. Next slide, please. Here is new subsection D3, which can be found on page 12 of the workshop rule draft. The language from the existing rule has not been changed. It has only been moved from section B exemptions. Next slide, please. Here are proposed new subsections D4 and D5 that have been added, which can be found on page 12 of the workshop rule draft. New subsection D4 includes best management practices during periods of startup and shutdown. These include subsection D4I, minimizing the engine's time spent at idle, and minimizing the engine startup time at startup to a period needed for appropriate and safe loading of the engine. This language comes from NESHAP 4Z. And or subsection D4II, operating the engine in accordance with the engine manufacturer's recommended procedures. New subsection D5 includes the requirement to minimize the frequency and duration of startup and shutdown periods and their associated emissions to the greatest extent practicable. This language is consistent with the EPA's SSM policy guidelines. Next slide, please. Here are the proposed amendments to subsection F2, which can be found on page 14 of the workshop rule draft. The frequency of annual maintenance requirements has been revised from once each calendar year to 1 year plus 30 days from the previous maintenance event. This change is consistent with similar requirements in NESHAP 4Z. Next slide, please. Finally, here are the proposed amendments to subsection G5, which has been revised to reference new subsection D3. This can be found on page 16 of the workshop rule draft. Next slide, please. And here is a summary table of the proposed amendments to the rule that were just discussed. Next slide, please. Impacts of rule amendments. For Rule 69.3.1, there are approximately 40 permitted gas turbine engines. There are no anticipated changes to emissions due to the proposed amendments. However, staff anticipates that revisions to existing permits will likely need to be made. For Rule 69.4.1, there are approximately 4,500 permitted engines. Similarly, there are no anticipated changes to emissions, but revisions to existing permits will likely need to be made. Staff recommends that current permit holders for both rules contact our engineering department with any questions regarding your specific permit. Next slide, please. Next steps. The proposed amended rule drafts and other related documents can be found on the district's rule development webpage, which can be accessed with the QR code shown in this slide. Written comments will be accepted through Friday, November 7th. Please email your questions and comments to apcdrules@sdapcd.org. Staff will be going before the governing board tentatively in the first quarter of next year. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. We'll now open the floor for any questions and comments you may have. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Miriam and Randy, for the presentation. And like Randy said, we're here to hear from you. You're welcome to submit any comments in the chat box, or you can feel free to raise your hand and we'd like to call on you if you'd like to answer a question or have some feedback for us. So we'll go ahead and open up the room for a few minutes and let people collect their thoughts. Like I said, we're here for you if there's any questions or concerns or other things you'd like to discuss regarding these two rules. Okay, I see a hand. We'll go to Steve Jepson.
Hi, this is Steve Jepson, Executive Director for Clean Water SoCal. We represent water and wastewater public agencies. It doesn't look like there's really any major changes from the presentation. Our concern is primarily for biogas, biomethane fueled engines. Is there any intention to minimize the number of startup and shutdown that might occur during a month or year?
I don't believe we're looking to minimize the number, but we are including language that does state that startups and shutdowns should include or should be minimized to the extent practicable. So understandably, that is somewhat of a, that term will probably be in the eye of an inspector, depending on how that they see the situation handling itself. So, it, did you want to add anything to that, Randy, or maybe some others at APCD, if they wanted to weigh in on that question? But I don't think that's our intent.
And Nick, you are correct. The rule does not specifically limit the frequency of startup and shutdown events during a calendar year. We added that language specifically in the rule, which comes straight from the EPA's SSM policy guidelines. So that in itself is pretty general, but we wanted to include it just to kind of meet the requirements of the SSM policy. And we did talk with EPA staff at the time, and they were open to having that language in the rule. And we kind of explained that limiting the actual number of startups and shutdowns could be problematic, especially because so many different engines have different requirements, and the number is not the same for any particular facility across the different engines. So the short answer is no, we're not specifically limiting startup and shutdown events for engines in these proposed amendments, just because of the understanding of how difficult coming up with a particular number would be. But we're trying to still meet the intent of the SSM guideline, the policy, as so directed by EPA.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And we'll make sure that comment is noted as well. And we'll give you our official response on that. I don't see it changing very much, but we'll probably word it a little bit better in our workshop report. Just a reminder for everyone on that. We do intend to take note of all these comments that we'll be getting. And then we'll either put this out in the form of a workshop report after the comment period is closed, and everyone who's in this workshop today would get a copy of that. If we get pressed for time, there's a chance that those comments would instead be collected within our staff report that would go to the board. Either way, that those comments would be noted, and our official responses to them. It just might change in terms of form, depending on how much time we have before we go to the board in the spring. So I just want to make sure everybody was clear on that. I see a comment in the chat, and I'll go ahead and read it, and then I might ask Randy to chime in on this one. So Conrad asked, these are for fixed engines, but not emergency engines that are portable. Randy, did you want to weigh in on that one?
Just so that I understand the comment, is the comment a question on startup and shutdown for stationary emergency engines? Is that correct?
Conrad, if you're on the line, if we could maybe if you'd like to unmute, not to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to unmute maybe, and then we could clarify exactly your question here.
I think
what I'm looking at is if you've got an emergency engine that you pull into a site somewhere that they need power because the power went out off the grid and are in there for a day or so, you're not running that engine all the time anyway, but you're going to go through and try and get it started up and run. You're not going to go through and be, sitting there running at idle and going through and creating a lot of NOx or anything. But way I read this, or at least I think I interpret what you're saying, this is for more fixed permanent engines that are at a site that they use for emergency backup power or their source of power, correct?
That's correct. The rule does apply to stationary engines. Engineering can correct me certainly, but it doesn't apply to portable in this particular case where the engine is only there for a limited time.
Okay, yeah, because we have a portable engine we use occasionally. We had to use it here a couple of weeks ago. We had a power outage for a few hours and stuff, but we we move it to other locations in Southern California if we got a power outage or somebody's doing construction and they have to go through and have power at the site sometimes, but that's pretty infrequent.
Yeah,
And I,
the changes that we're proposing are really just associated with engines that would be subject to that 69.4.1. So generally, those are just stationary permitted engines, but we can certainly clarify it. I think someone came off mute. I'm not sure who it was, but was that someone from ABCD staff perhaps wanting to chime in?
Yeah, Nick, this is Nick Juarez. So I work in our permitting department here at APCD, and Nick and Randy are both right. So this change applies to engines that have permits with us and are subject to Rule 69.4.1, and specifically those startup and shutdown exemptions are only going to be for prime power engines. And they also are only going to apply for typically with engines that have aftermarket emission control technology on them, where there's a period of time after they start up where the catalysts need to warm up before emissions are reduced. That's the intent of that startup and shutdown exemption from the emission standards, essentially, because it's just not technologically feasible to meet them during that time. But the one thing I wanted to clarify is that the maintenance requirements do still continue to apply to portable engines that have permits with us. And typically those are going to be where they return to the same facility routinely or stay at one, sort of facility, but move around that facility. And so if you have a permit with us, you would, have that requirement specified on the permit. But this rule doesn't apply to PERP registered engines, which I think most portable engines are going to be under that PERP program.
Okay.
Thanks, Nick. I did get another chat or a message emailed to me. It looks like a question asking if these two rules apply to industrial diesel generators. I believe, I guess, first clarification I would probably say to that is that these are two existing rules, so we're not necessarily proposing new rules here. These rules have been on the books for probably a few decades, but we're just proposing amendments to those rules. So just some changes to those existing requirements. And then whether they apply to industrial diesel generators, my response would be you'd probably have to check the applicability of Rule 69.4.1, which is our stationary engine rule. More than likely, if it's above a certain size or if it falls within the parameters of Rule 69.4.1, an industrial diesel generator likely would fall under this 69.4.1 rule. But like I said, it will depend on the size of the engine and how it's used. But in most cases, those things will be covered by the rule. All right, good questions. I'm not seeing any other hands or other comments at this point, but we'll give everyone another minute or two to see if there's anything that's really pressing or comes to mind as we're thinking about things here. Again, just as a reminder, we're kind of under a time somewhat of a time crunch on these rules, just based on the need to get them to EPA. We are targeting to get these rules to our board this spring. So they are these rule amendments, I should say. So we are on going to be kind of a fast timeline to get these done, so we can get them in. So our region does avoid sanctions to the region. What that means in terms of sanctions is, you know, if there's certain Clean Air Act requirements are not met to the liking of EPA, they have the ability to put in effectively penalties for the region. So it's kind of the teeth of the Clean Air Act that allows them to, you know, potentially in the worst case, remove highway funding from the region for different transportation projects. So, you know, for building freeways or transit operations, you know, that sort of thing. That's kind of the worst case scenario. There are things that they can do beforehand that are a little less harsh, but usually air agencies and states do not want to come close to meeting or to getting close to those sanctionable deadlines. And so again, that's kind of what is driving these amendments at this time, so we don't get into that situation. All right, I'll give it one last opportunity, I guess, if now that I'm not seeing any more hands raised or comments in the chat. Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I'm not crystal clear on, and apologize for not being better prepared, but I'm looking at slide 14 that discusses subsection D3 of 69.4.1, and it talks about 60 minutes of warm up for engines with SCR and 30 minutes without SCR. Is that in the current rule and just being moved, or are those new times?
Yeah, my Randy can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I believe those requirements, well, those were that language was currently in the exemption portion of the rule as it stands, and those times I believe have not changed.
That's what I thought. Yeah, okay.
Right. It's really just for that particular provision, taking it out of the exemptions portion of the rule and moving it into the standard section. But the 60 continuous minutes, the 30 continuous minutes, those have not changed. Can you correct me if I'm wrong on that, Randy?
You're correct, Nick. Just as Nick said, all these the proposed amendments basically copy the same language in the existing rule. So no changes were made, and were simply moved from the exemption underneath the standards in subsection D3. The reason being is the EPA SSM policy does not allow for automatic exemptions, even during startup, shutdown, malfunction events from the emission limits in the rule. So that was one of the fixes that we had to address with this set of amendments. And so functionally nothing has changed, but it's just that because we're now moving it under the standards, and it's these events are subject to other requirements, it's no longer an automatic exemption in the eyes of EPA, and hopefully will satisfy the policy guidelines.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification.
No problem. Okay, any last questions or comments? Okay, well, I think we'll probably go ahead and end the workshop today, but I'll move to the end. Whoops, went too far. I'll just go back to this slide. Like you said, if you have any other comments or questions, or if something kind of pops up after the meeting, do feel free to reach out to us. You can send an email to the email on the screen. You can send your comments as well to the same email address. And we are hoping to get any comments or questions about this rulemaking by November 7th. And I'd just like to thank everyone for being here today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.